trying to carve a 40-foot totem pole using this incredibly complex visual language that history literally spent over a century trying to erase.
Yeah.
Or like, imagine trying to speak your family's native tongue, but the very last person who spoke it fluently died before you were even born.
Right. It's a profound loss.
Exactly. You know the language exists and you know it belongs to you, but the actual mechanics of it, the vocabulary, the syntax, the rhythm, they're just missing. You're basically left standing in the middle of this massive, quiet void. And that is the stark reality of a disrupted cultural legacy.
It really is. I mean, it completely upends our traditional idea of inheritance.
Oh, for sure.
Because we usually think of inheritance as this very passive event. You receive an heirloom, you put it on a mantle, and that's it.
Oh.
But in the context of systemic cultural disruption, inheritance isn't just handed to you. It's something you have to go out and aggressively reconstruct from the ground up.
Which is exactly the journey we are exploring today. Welcome to this deep dive where we are doing something, honestly, incredibly special.
We really are.
Yeah, the source material we're working with today isn't a textbook. It's not a research paper or, a news article. It is a profoundly personal note provided by you, our listener, detailing your own journey into your cultural art form. You trusted us with this history, and wow, it is just a roadmap of resilience.
It's a remarkable document, mostly because it takes these massive, abstract historical forces and just totally grounds them in a single lived experience.
It really does. And you gave us 3 specific focal points in your note. The heavy footprint of your village being the very first to be colonized, the tragic deterioration of your ancestral teachings over time, and then your powerful decision to reclaim that heritage later in life by attending the Kaysen Indian Art School. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
I want to start right at the beginning with that specific detail you provided about your village being the first to face colonization. How does a community being the vanguard of that contact fundamentally change the trajectory of their history compared to a village that might have been colonized, say, decades later?
Well, it changes everything about the mechanics of cultural survival. When we talk about a village being the first, we aren't just noting some chronological trivia fact, right?
Right.
We're talking about an entirely different category of impact. That vanguard community absorbs the initial, longest, and most unmitigated wave of assimilation policies.
So they take the heaviest hit right out of the gate.
Exactly. For coastal or river access indigenous communities, being that first point of contact usually meant an immediate jarring shift from traditional economies to the maritime fur trade. And that was solved very quickly by permanent colonial settlements, missionaries, and government administrators.
I keep thinking about this like structural engineering in a way.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, like if a massive hurricane hits a coastline, the first row of buildings on the beach takes the absolute structural brunt of the wind and the storm surge. Like they take foundational damage.
Right, the front lines.
Exactly. The buildings a few blocks inland still get hit, sure. They might lose their windows or roofs, but that first row acted as a breakwater. They absorbed the maximum kinetic energy of the storm.
That is a really, really apt way to look at it. The villages that were colonized later often had one crucial advantage, which was time.
Time to prepare, you mean?
Yeah, they might have observed the shifts happening on the coast or heard rumors about new governmental policies, and they had a buffer period to adapt. They might have been able to, hide sacred items or strategically move certain ceremonies underground. But for the vanguard community, the disruption is sudden and comprehensive.
But I want to push back on the timeline here just a bit, based on a specific word you used in your note. You didn't say the teachings were instantly destroyed upon contact. You said they were deteriorated by the time you got into the art form.
Right. Deterioration is the key word there.
Yeah, so if a village gets hit with that initial heavy wave of colonization, why isn't it just an overnight erasure? How does that deterioration actually play out?
Well, because culture doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It exists in people. And people don't just instantly forget how to carve or weave or speak simply because a new government arrives on their shores.
That makes sense. The knowledge is still in their heads.
Exactly. The mechanism of deterioration is much more insidious than outright amnesia. It's tied directly to policies like the Canadian government's potlatch ban, which ran from 1885 all the way until 1951.
Right, and we should probably clarify what the potlatch actually was, because I know a lot of historical textbooks sort of frame it as just a big party or a festival.
Oh, it was far from it. The potlatch was the central economic, legal, and governmental engine of Northwest Coast societies.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. It was how wealth was redistributed, how marriages were recognized, how names were passed down, and crucially for this discussion, how art was commissioned.
Ah, I see.
When master carvers created masks, feast bowls, or poles, they were creating the legal documentation and the currency for the potlatch.
So when the government criminalized the potlatch, they were essentially freezing the bank accounts and shutting down the courts all at once.
And effectively bankrupting the artists in the process. If the ceremonies are illegal, the demand for the art just vanishes.
Right.
The master carvers of that era didn't suddenly forget how to carve, but they lost the economic ecosystem that allowed them to take on apprentices. The whole chain of organic knowledge transfer broke.
Because they couldn't afford to teach.
Exactly. The master might still carve a little bit in secret, or maybe for the tourist trade, but they aren't passing the deep ceremonial context to a dozen young students anymore.
Which completely explains the slow-motion attrition. It's not that the art form was bombed out of existence in a single day, it's that the mechanism for passing it to the next generation was dismantled.
Yes. Fast forward a generation or two, and the next group of elders remembers the shapes of the art, but maybe the nuanced techniques or the deep spiritual narratives attached to those specific cuts of the wood, they begin to fade.
They lose the details.
Exactly. So by the time it reached your generation, our listener, that chain of everyday organic transmission had worn incredibly thin. The environment that naturally fostered the art was just gone.
And that slow attrition leaves a massive vacuum. If a child isn't absorbing these shapes and stories just by, sitting in their village watching their uncles carve, what happens when they grow up and realize a massive piece of their identity is missing?
They have to go find it.
Right, they have to go find it. And that bridges us directly to the second part of your note, the reality of coming to this culture later in life.
The psychological and technical shift required to learn an ancestral art form as an adult. It honestly cannot be overstated.
Really? Is it that different from learning as a kid?
Oh, completely. In a healthy, continuous cultural ecosystem, this knowledge is absorbed passively. A child grows up surrounded by the art. They see the tools, they smell the cedar, they watch the movements of the knife.
It's just part of their everyday life.
Right, it becomes an intuitive part of their cognitive development. Coming to it later in life means the environment during those formative, sponge-like years of childhood was bereft of that specific cultural data.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. It feels identical to the mechanics of language acquisition.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, like when you learn a language as a toddler, you don't realize you're doing it. You don't sit down and study what a dangling participle is or how to conjugate a verb. You just mimic sounds until it becomes fluent speech.
You just absorb it.
But if you try to learn a complex language as a 30-year-old, it is exhausting. You have to actively study the grammar, memorize the vocabulary rules, and force your brain to consciously process the syntax before you can even speak a single sentence. Is reclaiming this specific art form later in life a similar cognitive process?
It is an identical cognitive process, especially when we're talking about Northwest Coast indigenous art, which is primarily based on what we call form line design.
Okay, break that down for us, because form line isn't just a style of painting a bear or a salmon, right? It's more complex than that.
Not at all, yeah. Form line is quite literally a visual language with a strict, almost mathematical grammar.
Mathematical.
Yes, it relies on specific continuous lines that swell and taper, creating structural shapes called ovoids, U-forms, split U-forms, and S-forms.
Okay, so very specific building blocks.
Exactly. And these shapes have to interact with each other based on very rigid spatial rules, utilizing positive and negative space in specific ratios. You can't just freehand a design, you have to construct it according to the laws of the form line vocabulary.
So if you grew up seeing form line everywhere, your brain naturally maps those spatial ratios. Kind of the same way a native English speaker just knows a sentence sounds wrong, even if they can't explain the grammatical rule that was broken.
Yes, precisely. A child raised in that tradition knows intuitively when a U-form is too wide or an ovoid is pinched.
Right, it just looks off to them.
But an adult arriving later in life has to consciously reverse engineer the entire system. They have to get out the compass and the straight edge, sit at a drafting table, and deliberately learn the geometric rules of an art form that their ancestors would have just felt in their bones.
Man, that level of intentionality is staggering. But I have to imagine there is a massive emotional hurdle there too, right?
Without a doubt.
Because it's not just a mechanical challenge of learning to draw an ovoid. If I'm an adult trying to learn the art of my own ancestors from scratch, I'm going to feel a profound sense of grief because every single time I struggle with the technique, I'm reminded of the historical theft that put me in this position in the first place.
That is a very common and very heavy burden for adult learners in these contexts. Many describe dealing with intense imposter syndrome.
I can totally see that.
Yeah, because you are stepping into a tradition that rightfully belongs to you, but because the organic transmission was broken by that early colonization of your village, you might feel like a tourist in your own culture at first.
Wow, a tourist in your own culture, that's heavy.
It is. You're mourning the fact that this wasn't given to you freely in childhood, while simultaneously doing the incredibly rigorous work of mastering the physical craft.
Yeah.
It requires a massive amount of vulnerability.
You are actively choosing to rebuild a bridge that history spent a century trying to burn down. But, okay, that raises the logistical question. If the bridge and the village is burned, and the traditional apprentice model is deteriorated, where do you actually go to learn this visual language?
Right, how do you cross the gap?
Exactly, how do you cross it? And your note provided the pivotal answer to that. You attended the Kaisan Indian Art School.
Which is a fascinating turning point in the timeline of Northwest Coast art. Kaisan, which is located in Hazelton, British Columbia, in Gitxsan territory, was officially founded around 1970.
So, relatively recent.
Yes, and this was a critical era. It was the dawn of a massive cultural renaissance, a period where indigenous leaders and artists actively pushed back against the deterioration we've been discussing.
I'm struggling to understand the dynamic here, though. Let's look at the concept of a formal school. Historically, especially in Canada and the US, the Western institutional school model, like specifically residential schools, was the primary weapon used to erase indigenous culture, right?
Absolutely it was.
To punish the language out of kids, to ban the art. So isn't there a massive friction in using a formal institutional classroom to save the very culture that classrooms were literally built to destroy?
There is absolute friction, and what's fascinating here is that is precisely what makes places like Kaisan so brilliant. It is an act of profound cultural subversion.
Subversion, I like that.
Yeah, the founders of Kaisan and the communities that supported it looked at the reality of their situation. The deterioration in the villages meant the old way of learning, sitting around the fire, absorbing the knowledge casually, was just no longer viable to save the art form from extinction.
The chain was too broken.
Right, the chain was broken. So they adapted. They took the Western institutional model of a curriculum-based school and weaponized it for their own survival.
Oh, wow. They built a cultural lifeboat.
Exactly. They centralized the remaining master carvers. They formalized the curriculum of formline design, tool making, and wood carving. And they created a dedicated space where adults could come and do that intensive reverse engineering work we talked about.
So they recreated the environment.
They essentially artificially recreated the immersion environment that colonization had destroyed.
So what does this all mean for the experience of the student? When you, our listener, walked into Kaisan, you weren't just signing up for a casual elective in, watercolor painting.
Not at all. At Kaisan, you are learning exacting, unforgiving techniques. You're learning how to forge your own curved knives, how to select the right cedar, how to map out complex spatial designs on a three-dimensional surface.
Which sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. But beyond the mechanics, you are learning the worldview that birthed those designs. You are learning the stories, the crests, and the social structures that give the art its actual power.
And crucially, you aren't doing it alone. If you're an adult who felt that imposter syndrome we talked about, who felt the weight of that temporal gap, walking into Kaisan means walking into a room full of other adults who are navigating the exact same void.
That's a huge point. The community aspect of that reclamation cannot be ignored. The village-level transmission may have deteriorated, but Kaisan provided a new, modern village square.
I love that framing, a modern village square.
Yeah, it is a space where the grief of a lost childhood knowledge is met with the empowerment of adult mastery. The institution acts as a safety net, catching those who fell through the cracks of that early colonial history and giving them the tools to literally carve their identity back into existence.
It's a testament to the sheer adaptability of the culture. The original mechanism of the potlatch and the organic apprentice model was dismantled, so the culture simply built a new engine to keep the knowledge moving forward.
It's pure survival and adaptation.
And that brings us full circle to the incredible narrative arc of the note you've shared with us. We started with the absolute devastation of your village being the vanguard, being the first to take that structural damage from colonization, which triggered a century of slow, quiet deterioration of the old teachings.
And we explored the immense difficulty of arriving at that deteriorated landscape as an adult, having to actively, consciously learn a complex visual language that should have been yours by birthright.
But the culmination of this story isn't the deterioration. The culmination is your decision to attend Keisan. It is your conscious, deliberate fight to reclaim those teachings.
Right, and if we pull back and look at the macro level, your personal journey illustrates a fundamental truth about cultural knowledge. The knowledge that is passed down to us easily, without friction, is wonderful, but we often take it for granted.
Sure, we don't think about it.
But the knowledge that we have to fight for, the heritage we have to consciously seek out, study, and master against the massive currents of historical erasure, that is a knowledge we hold on to with a fierce, unbreakable grip.
Wow.
Your reclamation of this art form at Keisan is the ultimate refutation of that initial colonial impact. They hit your village first, but they did not have the final say.
They really didn't. You refused to accept an empty box as your inheritance. You went out, found the pieces, learned the complex grammar of how they fit together, and rebuilt the legacy with your own two hands. We want to genuinely thank you for trusting us with this history. It's just an incredible example of how resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about actively creating and rebuilding.
It really shifts the entire paradigm of what it means to be a contemporary Indigenous artist. You aren't just making art, you are practicing a sophisticated form of historical repair.
And that brings us to the end of today's exploration, but we want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you continue your work. Now that you have navigated this gap, now that you have gone to Keisan later in life and mastered the vocabulary of formline and the use of the carving tools, your role has fundamentally changed. You are no longer just the adult learner, you are now the practitioner. You are the one holding the knowledge that your ancestors fought to protect. So how does the art you create today change the landscape for the next generation of your village? You've done the exhausting work of repairing the bridge. How will you use your newly reclaimed tools to teach those who come next, ensuring that they can absorb this beautiful visual language in their childhood and never have to wait until later in life to know exactly who they are?